First story. The saga of OP, who had enough of their spoiled cousins that she uninvited her entitled aunts from her wedding. Then they turned on their homophobic switches and tried to ruin her wedding and got disinherited from grandma's will. I 26F have been with my partner 27F for 5 years, and we are getting married next year. Overall, the wedding planning has gone pretty smoothly until now. For context, there is a large age gap in my family. When it comes to the grandchildren on my mother's side, my dad is an only child. My mother had me in her mid-20s, and my 2 aunts waited till they were in their late 30s to have kids. So I've just been more of an extra aunt to a lot of my cousins, about 4 of them, all between 6 and 10, all girls, except for my cousin Kate 25F, who is the daughter of my mother's older brother. Now I love my family, but my aunts have always been the kind of parents who can never say no to their precious children, and that has resulted in them being spoilt brats. Over the last decade, there has not been one family event that hasn't been ruined in some capacity by a child having a tantrum over something stupid. In the last year alone, we've had tantrums over not wanting to leave a party, even though the party place was closing, not having the correct flavor of strawberry ice cream at our grandfather's 85th birthday, or just getting a pack of hair bows that didn't match each other, and many others that, to be honest, are the reason why they feel made up. And these tantrums are bad, like the full screaming, pounding the floor, and enough tears to water a field until their mothers give in to their demands. The husbands are just real walkovers, to be honest, and let their wives deal with the kids. It took a long time to even bring my partner to one of our many family events, just because I always knew these tantrums were going to happen, and I didn't want to scare her away. I work with kids, so I know this is beyond the normal behavior of kids, and I know the lack of discipline is to blame, but I've never been in a position to call it out, because in my family, it's very much worth it if you don't have kids. Your opinion of how to raise them doesn't count. But as the kids have gotten older, it's gotten so much worse. Now onto the wedding planning. We are not having a large wedding because neither of us wants it. Between our family members, we want them to be friends. It's just over 100 people. My partner's family has no kids under 16, and when the idea of having a child-free wedding came up, it was clear that my partner liked the idea of no one under 16. And to be honest, I was happy with it, as well as that our dogs were going to fill the roles of ring bearer and flower girl anyway. And we both knew there was going to be at least one tantrum, and neither of us wanted to subject our friends and her family to those. My parents and grandparents agreed that it would be nice to have no kids for a change, and with that, we sent the invitations out. Not long after the invitations went out, we had my cousin Kate's wedding. She grew up 3 hours away and hasn't turned up to really any family events in the last decade. But her mother made her invite everyone to show off, as there were over 400 people. Don't get me wrong, you could tell a lot of money was put into the event, and it was lovely, but I personally wouldn't have liked it for my day. Her new husband had a niece and nephew, so they did the flower girl and ring bearer roles, and yes, there were tantrums thrown when that news broke. And it only took 5 minutes into the wedding for a tantrum to happen, because one of the kids wanted to sit in the front, and not a few pews back. My partner has gotten into the habit after 4 years of these events of keeping track of the tantrums on her notes app, and she counted 3 in the church alone. It only got worse as it was raining after, and the kids didn't want to wear jackets to get to the car, and many tears happened. The meal wasn't much better, but thankfully, we were at the head table with my grandparents away from it. But you couldn't not hear the whining and shouting occasionally throughout the meal. Things got bad when, at some point before dessert, 2 of the kids came up to me and asked why they were not invited to my wedding as they had been for Kate. A bit stunned, I just replied that the place we were having it was only for adults. That obviously was the wrong answer, because almost immediately another tantrum about how apparently their parents had promised them they would be the flower girls at my wedding erupted. Thankfully, they were small for their age, so it was pretty easy to pick them up and move them away from the head table, which was on a stage and away from people staring. While this was happening, my parents were confronted by my aunts, asking how it was that their kids were not invited. My parents just repeated the same thing as I had said, and this also wasn't good enough. At this point, my grandfather and I were behind them with 2 of their screaming children. I honestly don't know what came over me, but I blurted it out. You really cannot see why I might not want to have your children there on my wedding day. Can you please stop discussing this right now? This is not the time, and people are already staring at us. And left. Well, let's just say that while most of my family agreed with what I said, now my aunts are refusing to attend the wedding until I apologize to them and their kids and invite them. Some family members think it was the wrong time to say anything or just apologize to keep the peace. But honestly, I don't want to, as I don't think what I said was that bad, especially considering the things I knew the groom's family was saying after the wedding from what I heard from Kate and her new husband. Update. Okay, so I never expected this post to get as much attention as it did. So yeah, here's an update. So yeah, Christmas happened. And yeah, it was apparently a SHT show. I had planned ahead of time to spend Christmas with my partner and in-laws, who live over an hour away, and then celebrate Boxing Day back at home with my parents and grandparents. But to my surprise, my mother contacted me late on Christmas Day, just to say the Boxing Day celebrations were called off after a disastrous Christmas meal with the family, which at the last minute included the aunts and the children. So apparently they had decided that as the family had been going NC in the week since the events at my cousin Kate's wedding, they were going to turn up to my great-grandmother's house for Christmas and confront me about it to my face to make me apologize for calling out their kids' behavior. They usually do their own thing at Christmas and often go to their in-laws. I forgot to mention they are married to brothers who are two of the weirdest men I've ever met. But that's a rant for another day. I guess they thought if my 99-year-old great-grandmother, my mother's mom, was present, I wouldn't refuse their demands. However, they failed to check that I might not be there, and according to my father, their faces when they realized their plan had backfired were hilarious. Obviously, their little terrors were running rampant and screaming their heads off, and one even had a temper tantrum because there were no presents for them under the tree. The aunts had turned up in the middle of the Christmas meal several hours after all the presents were opened, but apparently the kid couldn't comprehend that, according to my aunt. At one point, my great-grandmother got so annoyed at the screaming that she yanked her hearing aids out. No one in the family had thought to fill her in on what had gone down at Kate's wedding. It was one of those we all thought someone else had done, so she was a bit confused at first. She knew the wedding was childless, so she couldn't understand why they were making such a fuss about it, and wanted to just get over it. She said she'd like to enjoy the likely last wedding she'll ever attend in peace away from screaming children. My family has a very dark sense of humor. Between that and what I said earlier, I think most of my family has had enough of their crazy excuses. Obviously, after Great Granny said this, they went on about their poor angels, but they didn't have much of a leg to stand on, as pretty soon after they opened their mouths, the terrors had gotten into my grandmother's homemade baked Alaska and had dropped it, ruining the desert for everyone. Apparently, my grandfather just snapped and told them to get out and let them enjoy one family event in peace, and they needed to get their children's behavior in order if they ever wanted to be invited to another family event, as their children's behavior was out of line and was only going to backfire on them the older they got. This man had served for over 10 years in the army and another 25 years as a police officer, and it is terrifying when he snaps, so understandably they got out of there ASAP. My great-grandmother even opened one of her fancy bottles of whiskey to celebrate. My grandfather had been one of those who did not want to disinvite them and keep the peace he's financially contributing to the wedding. But when I got home yesterday, he gave me full permission to rescind their invitations. I had originally decided not to rescind my aunt's invitations, but to give them a warning that if they turn up with their children or try to cause a scene, they will be escorted off the property immediately. But now, after an emergency family meeting on Boxing Day, we ended up just rescinding their invitations and instead just using what we would have spent on the 4 meals on jewelry for myself, my mom, my grandmother, and my great-grandmother as a memento. My parents and partner are 100% behind me on this, and we're lucky that our venue is owned by my soon-to-be in-laws, with that security included in the cost, as they have had several crazy family member stories from renting it out for weddings and events over the last 30+ years. It's run in-house by my soon-to-be brother-in-law, so we have full control of who is allowed on the property during the wedding. My maid of honor and bestie has also volunteered herself in the case of one of them turning up in a white dress to be the one to take one for the team and spill a glass of red wine. Her backup plan is using my doys, both West Highland Terriers, who will be at the wedding, who are trained to pee on command and have an accident. She's a drama teacher, so I'd be pretty confident in her being able to make it look convincing as an accident if a worst-case scenario happened. In terms of whether I knew the kids coming up to me at the wedding was their parents' way of guilt-tripping me, yes, I did know. This is far from the first time it has happened. For example, when one of the terrors had their Holy Communion, it fell around the same time my partner and I had adopted our 2 dogs. We hadn't expected to get 2, but they were inseparable, and we just fell in love with them immediately and took both home. My job requires me to work Saturday mornings, so I couldn't attend the church service for the communion, and there was no real way to get it off so early on. I made sure everyone knew I wouldn't be attending the church service, making sure to hand-deliver a card with money for the child the day before with a small gift, because apparently to my aunts, money doesn't count as a gift. Anyway, later on at the meal, the sister of the child who had their communion just came straight up to me during the event and asked me why I never turned up to the church in front of everyone and asked where their puppy was. Apparently, my aunt had told them one of my puppies was for them. Let's just say tantrums happened, and the puppy they did end up getting lasted 1 week, as it now lives with my in-laws. They hadn't pulled that stunt in a while, at least not to myself, so I guess that's what threw me off more than anything else. As with what was said by Kate's in-laws, not long after I got back to the table, Kate's now mother-in-law sent us over a round of drinks to help with our growing headaches. And there was a lot of, how on earth do you deal with this on a regular basis? And oh boy, they're going to be nightmares when they're older. We were also betting with the rest of the bridal party when the next tantrum would happen. My partner won betting when there would be one just before the speeches. And there were a few rounds of who could guess what the reason for a tantrum was, thanks to my partner's 4-year-long notes. Kate's in-laws also share my family's dark humor. So later in the night, we were betting which would be the worst once the teenage years and all those hormones hit. Was it the most adult way of dealing with it? Probably not, but I was too drunk and annoyed to care about that. Relevant comments. The last Mongo. Glad things are working out. And I just have to say, I love your great-grandmother. Oh truly, the woman is iconic. She also technically got this whole saga started when she set me up with my partner all those years ago. Gratified viewer. 3 effing cheers for Grandpa and Great-Grandma. Those two are easily the heroes of this story. Of course, after the little SHTS ruined dessert, I wouldn't be surprised if other relatives were getting in line to tell the aunts off. Oh yeah, they ruined the dessert for basically every family member over 50, about 25 people. And a lot of them live over a day drive away. So they only get my grandma's baked Alaska once a year at Christmas. So they were not pleased at all. Update 2. Hi all. I've gotten a lot of requests in the comments and DMs to explain the weird husbands, and for a potential update part 1 and update 1. This is going to be long because I have a lot of questions and an update that's pretty chaotic, so here we go. To start, the husbands are not twins, but I have a hard time telling them apart. They have the same height, the same hairstyle, usually similar clothing choices, and even the same profession. The only way I can tell is that one has a faded tattoo of a bird on his eyebrow. Why he has that, I don't know. It's quite ironic, because my 2 aunts would hardly classify as sisters based on looks, as one looks exactly like my grandmother, and the other like my grandfather. It's only when you see them with my mom or uncle that you can see the resemblance, because they both look like they are a combo of my grandparents. They are also 10+ years younger than my aunts. Not against age gap relationships in general, but it's definitely weird to see your aunt married to a guy who's only about 8 years older than you, and they look young for their ages. Now for the weird stuff. They both are very weird about women, particularly women younger than them. They have this weird, almost 1950s idea about women, and how they should be, particularly with what they wear. They don't like the idea of women, particularly women under 50, wearing pants. And one of them has said to my face before how women in pants make him feel uncomfortable. I wish I could say I was kidding, but I know from personal experience that I get treated very differently by them if I'm wearing a dress or pants. They can't even look me in the eye if I'm wearing pants. I know in some cultures and regions this is a thing, but in 2024 in Canada, for an Irish family, this is just weird. The weird essayist ideas don't stop there, unfortunately. They've more than once mentioned they believe women shouldn't bother going into certain fields, as the man will always end up as the breadwinner, as it's the father's main job to provide for the family. It feels weird to write that 2 grown men were horrified that a woman earned more than they did. But when my mother let slip that my partner's job as a corporate lawyer meant she earned more than both of them, they legit looked horrified. There's also weird stuff like how they'll never drive a red car. Why not be entirely sure? It has something to do with Satan, and one apparently hates green vegetables. Also, just how they interact with people is just really weird. It's hard to describe in words, but it's like that person we all have in our lives that just gives us the ick anytime you have to interact with them. And they have that in spades. Outside of their stable jobs, I don't know what my aunts see in them. When I first met them, one of them would wear glasses frames with no glass where the prescription glass would be. Thankfully, he stopped that. Finally, for the husbands, probably the weirdest thing about them is their family, particularly their mother. I've only met this woman a handful of times at family events organized by the aunts, and their wedding, yes, it was a joint wedding, and to be honest, I tend to stay away from her because her family is pretty nutty. She's one of those people where you feel like if you're stuck talking to her for more than 5 minutes, you're going to get yourself pulled into a Ponzi scheme. The highlight is that she refuses to tell her children where she lives. All they know is that she always flies off a flight from the same airport, and that's the extent to which they know of her whereabouts. She's still married to the dad, but they just live separately outside of holiday periods since the kids turned 18, because she doesn't believe in divorce after they had a shotgun wedding at 17, very religious, and they just don't like each other. I think my aunts like her because they see it and don't have to share her attention like they do with my grandparents. Her mother, the husband's grandmother, is also just very weird. She also carries a bottle of holy water with a photo of one of the popes on it, and she sprinkles it on people. I've avoided her at all costs after she tried to set me up with her unmarried nephew. When I was 19, he was definitely in her early 30s, because apparently she couldn't compute the idea of a gay woman in general, but especially not one having long hair and liking dresses and makeup. So about the size of the wedding, and how apparently 100 people is actually quite large. I come from an Irish Catholic family on my mother's side, and my dad is an Italian French Canadian. So any wedding that is under 300 people in my family is considered small. At my parents' wedding, there were over 500 people there. I've also had a surprising number of questions in my DMs about how the dogs are trained to use the bathroom on command. Well, to explain, my grandmother was a dog trainer for many years, training people with guide dogs. And one of the things she trained the dogs to do is if you say, busy, busy, they know that's the signal they can go to the bathroom if they need to go. Obviously, they can and will go. Otherwise, it's not just on command, but say, for example, that we live in a city, and we have about 6 spots on our usual walking route where the dogs are able to use the bathroom. So whenever we pass them, we give them the quack, and they know it's good to go if they need to. She's trained all the dogs in my family, so they all do that. I didn't think it was that weird. And now for the update, buckle up. This gets weird. The aunts. So things were eventually quiet in the days following the blow-up on Christmas Day. My aunts initially responded to the message I sent by uninviting them to the wedding with a lot of abusive text messages and phone calls. My mother stepped in and said anything they wanted to say to me would go through her, and because my aunts are scared of my mother, it stopped. We were surprised they didn't put anything on Facebook, because usually that's what happens anytime they are mad about something or someone. Overall, the rest of Christmas and New Year's were pretty great, and the headaches we had at our annual New Year's family lunch were from drinking the night before and not screaming children. Both myself and my partner don't work over the Christmas break, along with my parents, so the days following, we just kept going with the remainder of the wedding planning. My partner is very kind. A lawyer who loves a spreadsheet, my mother, a financial advisor, and my mother-in-law are wedding planners, so between them they have done like 65% of the planning. I just have to come in for all the fun parts, which, to be honest, suits me, because I do not have the brain or the patience to sit and go through the hours of budget meetings they have already done. It was after the new year that we realized the aunts didn't take the invitation to the wedding, along with the calling out from the family, as well as we would have hoped. I don't know how, but this all happened within the last week. But things started to get weird last Wednesday when I was at work, and I got a call from my partner, which in itself was weird because, given our jobs, we don't always call each other during the workday. At most, we'll send each other a text or just wait till we know the other is available, so this surprised me. Apparently, my aunts tried to contact our venue that morning and canceled, with one of them claiming to be me. I'm pretty sure they were aware that the venue is owned by my soon-to-be-in-laws, but if they weren't, apparently my mother-in-law made it very clear to them. Then after that didn't work, they drove over to our old apartment building, and apparently we had forgotten to mention to them that we had moved before Christmas, and the aunts got themselves arrested for trespassing because they threw a hissy fit believing we still lived there, and we told the doorman to lie for us. My partner lived in the building for 8 years and has a lot of friends still living there, including the doorman who contacted her about the incident to inform her. I have to give credit to my partner. By the time I got home from work, all of my family was informed of the events and warned that under no circumstances was our new address to be shared. And if they had any contact with the aunts, as I mentioned, they were to contact her if anything suspicious came up. This was also extended to our friends and anyone else we could think of, including our dog sitters and our resident association. And yes, my great-grandmother thought the situation was hilarious, saying, "And here I thought life would be boring at 99. They contacted my grandparents to bail them out. But thankfully my grandparents didn't give in to their demands like they usually would. I love my grandparents, but they have always been real pushovers when it comes to my aunts their entire lives. And it seems now, over the past few weeks, they have realized what they did wrong, as their parents have now also affected their grandchildren. They were very strict with my mom and her brother, whom my grandparents had as teenagers, while my aunts, who were in their early 30s, could do no wrong in their eyes. According to stories from my mom, there was nothing my aunts could do to get disciplined by my grandparents. Even when one of them got a tattoo at 15 and the other got caught drinking underage, my grandparents would complain about them to other people, but would never say anything directly to them. A lot of my mother's family didn't live close by, so there was no one with an outside perspective that really saw how bad it was, especially as they hit the teenage years. By that point, my mom and her brother were both well out of the house, living their own lives, and it was only when my aunts were older that we had some family. such as my great-grandparents. But by that point, there wasn't much they could do. Unfortunately, on this recent Tuesday, I got called out on my lunch break by my boss, who informed me the tires on my car had been slashed and a letter on the front of my car with flyers with all anti-gay stuff on the windscreen. Apparently this time it wasn't the aunts, but their mother-in-law who did it and was arrested, while at the same time my aunts went to my grandparents' house to confront them. I'll summarize all that was said, but their anger was not so much directed at my grandparents directly, but more at how my grandparents apparently took my side over theirs. According to my aunts, my grandparents should always back them over me because, as their granddaughter, I was lower in the familial hierarchy, whatever the FCK that's supposed to mean. Then the usual homophobic stuff came up, and apparently claimed my late great-grandfather would have never approved of my life choices, and it was disgraceful their inheritance is going towards my wedding dress. For context, my great-grandfather and I were born on the same day, 75 years apart, and I was named after him. A small part of the inheritance that he had set up for me when I was born was added to a fund that he had set up for me to pay for things including my education and other things that I might need, which for me currently includes my wedding dress and now 4 new tires. He wasn't extremely rich, but he had built a successful business back in Ireland and sold it to a bigger overseas competitor in the late 1970s, which allowed him and my grandmother to follow his siblings, who had moved to the US and Canada in the years previous, to set up an even more successful business, which he sold in the 1990s. The remainder of the inheritance is put away and controlled by my great-grandmother to pay for her care and upkeep of her home until she passes, and then what remains goes into the control of my grandparents. Now for the kicker. What my aunts didn't know was that my great-grandmother was in the next room hearing everything, and she's the complete opposite of my grandparents and takes no bullshit from anyone. Once great-grandpa mentioned she was fuming if you have an Irish mammy, you know exactly what I'm talking about, and she came into the room and berated them, stating she was cutting them out of the inheritance because that's all they seemed to care about. That apparently shut them up and changed their tune, and my grandparents saw the monsters they created. My parents have joked in the past that my aunts only contact my grandparents when they want something and wouldn't even think otherwise. But it's most likely their jokes were correct. And great-granny wasn't kidding when she said she's taking them out of the will. She's already met with her lawyer today to discuss changing the will. At this point, I didn't know if I should be laughing at the absurdity of the situation or crying from the stress this has brought. Seriously, how does a comment about screaming entitled children and embarrassing the family at a wedding result in me considering talking with a lawyer about pursuing harassment charges? And now the feeling that I've ripped my grandparents' vision of their family up. My parents and partner have been my rocks, and honestly, I don't know what I would do without them backing me up. Also, thanks to everyone on here for their comments and DMs letting me know I'm not going crazy. I know something like this is eventually going to happen, and I'm glad the families are on the same page, but I never imagined it could get this chaotic. Relevant comments. Bottom 42. It sounds like your comment, although it started some drama, was the eye-opener your family really needed. But the aunts and their in-laws sound crazy. You should definitely pursue charges and keep these people away from you. It sounds like they have only continued to escalate. Now that they have been disinherited, it could get much worse. OPA, I think we all had a feeling it was going to blow up at some point, because we were all just getting sick of them and the children's behavior. But I don't think any of us imagined how chaotic it was going to be. We've sent off some legal letters, not exactly sure the right legal term, basically saying stop the harassment, or we will pursue charges, so hopefully that will stop the madness. DW Great-Granny is nice and safe. She's living her best life and finishing the plans for her 100th birthday party. Second story. Narcissistic mom gave OP fake ashes of his little sister and lied about it for the past 4 years. She outed it while drunk, then victimized herself and blamed OP. Now she just ghosted him without telling him the reason or where his little sister is placed. My mother and father divorced when I was young. They had an oops baby together after my mom remarried, which rocked that marriage apart. That oops baby was my little sister. She died abruptly in an accident 4 years ago, at only 14. You know how people say the first days after a death are the hardest? They don't account for when there's no first to be had. When they should have been getting ready for prom, but never will, it's a completely different pain. My mom and I were talking about it. We were both drinking, and she slipped that my bit of ashes I carry that I thought were my sister's were just regular ashes. Burnt wood. She already poured out my sister's ashes without me or my brother on the plot she bought with my stepdad. She couldn't fathom my rage because, to her, the sentiment and emotions are the important aspects, not that it's physically my sister. My anger is prompted by the lies and the fact that those sentiments and emotions are attached to something, not my little sister. and I had no idea she cast her ashes on a plot she wouldn't have cared about. I screamed at her to get out of my house, locking the door behind her and calling up my stepdad to pick her up. I threw the necklace out the window to the front lawn, then regretted it and tore it out of her hands when she picked it up. As she would say it, I made a scene and embarrassed her. I kept screaming and calling her a liar whenever she tried to explain herself or get back inside. I was threatening to call the cops on her when my stepdad finally showed up and took her away. He called me the next day and left a message saying that he wanted to talk about what happened and how he understands why I'm angry and hurt. He just wants to talk. But I need to talk to my mother too about this, because she's a grieving mother, emphasis added, and my sister's death was a huge blow to the entire family. And everyone is still trying to regain their bearings, so some kindness is needed. All I can think of right now is my mom's heartbroken face as I ripped my necklace with my sister's ashes out of her hands, or the way she turned away from me crying as my stepdad ushered her into the car. I called her names, and I let my pain and rage take over. But I can't get over the lies. 4 years of thinking my necklace had my sister, of thinking she was right by my heart, and it all came undone because my mom had too much to drink. How long would she have let me think about this? How long would the lie continue? Comments. Center off chaos. Yes, your mother is grieving. But you, her very living child, are too. Having your mother lie to you about something important is going to get an emotional reaction. What you do is up to you. But I wouldn't let her frame this as embarrassing her, or that she's a victim in any way. She lied about it. She got drunk and tattled on herself. These are the consequences of her own actions. The script bandit. The mom thought that was going to be a cute little anecdote. What kind of person does that kind of stuff? Casually just drops a bomb. OP. It was an absolute mistake on her part that she even said it. We were talking about prom season and how hard it can be to be reminded of things that my sister would have loved. Then she started to say, I start crying before I even reach the cemetery sometimes, and she named it by name. I started flipping then and was like, what cemetery? Why that cemetery? In a sort of why are we talking about cemeteries when we're talking about her way? I kept pushing her for an explanation, and that's when the whole thing came out. Update. 6 days later. I gave my mother an ultimatum. Either tell my brother and father, or I will. She refused to, because you reacted so horribly. And she told me not to tell because you're doing this to hurt me, and you're just going to hurt them. So I told them. I sat my dad and brother down and explained that the necklaces didn't have the right ashes in them. I've never seen my dad break like that, and I've never heard my brother scream at me like that. He was angry that I knew before him and didn't immediately tell him. This is SHT, you tell me. You needed to tell me. We tell each other everything. But he started crying and apologizing to me, admitting he's just so mad about what mom did, and he can't handle it. So I guess that's clearly something else me and my brother share. We get overwhelmed initially before cooler heads prevail. My dad looked gutted, but he was clearly trying to piece himself back together. He said a lot of the same things other people had said to me in my other post. We can get some of the dirt from the plot where she was scattered. The necklace has the meaning we attribute to it, and she's still with us even if her body hasn't been physically with us. I feel bad because of some of what my mom said, i.e. the bit about the necklace being important even without her ashes in it. But I was able to accept that much easier from him. Maybe because he didn't lie to me for 4 years and dropped a bomb on me out of nowhere because I pulled apart a lie. He held my brother and me as we cried, and he apologized for the pain, and he said it wasn't fair that I had to be the adult when my mother should have told all of us a lot sooner. Dad's going to try to talk to my stepfather to find the plot, because my mom has been refusing to talk to us anymore, not answering messages or picking up the phone. Her social media has even gone dark. He's going to find out where the plot is and go to the site. I don't know if I could if it were up to me. It just feels like the final bit of proof that this effed up nightmare is real, and my sister is mixed with dirt, rocks, and grass on an unmaintained and unvisited plot. My mom and I always had some issues, but that's normal. This is worse than anything, and we had a rough patch when I came out that we didn't even talk, but we mended fences after. I can't see ever forgiving her, not with how she dropped this on me, blamed me for my reaction, and left me to do what she should have done. To top it off, she won't even show the decency to explain why or even talk to me. When we were discussing cremation, it was agreed that we would all get a necklace with the ashes. My mind keeps going over things that just didn't add up fully, times she almost slipped, or things that make complete sense now. She almost left behind her necklace on a trip, and didn't freak out like I would have, because she knew where my sister was the whole time. She volunteered to be the one to separate the ashes and gave Dad the rest. I assume those ashes are the same as ours. They are fake. God, this whole thing just makes me want to curl up in a hole and never see the light of day again. I've been on and off crying all week without being able to stop, or just so angry I could scream. In the middle of my damn workday, suddenly I'm rushing to the bathroom to hide the fact that I'm breaking all over again because I can't stop my thoughts. I quit smoking after my sister died, but I picked it right back up again. My dad has been calling me every day to check in on me and remind me of how much he loves me and how much my brother loves me. I think he's afraid. My brother has come over each day since the talk with his girlfriend to make sure I eat something. I don't know how to end this post. I feel lost and like I don't know anything anymore. I feel like a burden because my dad and brother are both dealing with a revelation too, but they're clearly thinking of me and checking in on me. I'm going to look into grief counseling, but the therapist I saw after my sister died isn't practicing anymore, and my insurance isn't accepted by a lot of therapists. I try to remind myself that my little sister wouldn't have minded so much becoming woven into a tapestry of grass and flowers, and that I can visit her once we know where she was cast, and make sure her sight is always beautiful. Thank you to everyone who helped me and shared their own perspectives and stories. I really appreciate it. Comments. Splap. You mentioned she said the cemetery's name when she tattled on herself. Can you call and ask about the plot? It's probably under your mother's or your sister's name. Then you can visit and not have to go through your mother at all. OP. It's my mother and stepfather's plot. If trying through my stepfather fails, I'll try that. I didn't think I could just call up and say, is there an empty plot section for the so-and-so family? But it's worth trying. Family Guy 421. I am the head of a cemetery commission. Just call them up. We don't care about drama, just information. The best of luck to you, OP. Thank you so much, that means a lot. Thank you for watching the video. If you are interested in listening to these kinds of stories, we've got more in store for you. Simply subscribe to our channel, hit the like button, and share it with your friends.